Hi everyone, this is the training video for ED documentation within QuadraMed. The previous video addressed order entry and interaction with the whiteboard and whiteboard functions. We're going to continue to use the same patient out check, and as you can see we've already ordered a few things for them. However, you notice that the provider and attending column are still blank. As you interact with the ED notes, you'll notice that these fields also get updated. I'm going to go back into QuadraMed, and as you notice here, I have now logged in as a medicine test resident. When I click on the patients, you'll notice that it takes me immediately to their ED home view where all the ED notes are housed. There's three different notes within the ED home view. One is the initial note, one is the progress note, one is the disposition note, and also you'll see the invasive procedure note, which you can use optionally to document procedures. This is a standard procedure note for the hospital. However, if you want, for brevity, you can also use the progress note to document procedures. The general workflow for an ED patient is going to require that you complete an initial note and a disposition note. However, a disposition note cannot be completed unless someone has gone back and done an initial note. What this means is that every patient needs to have an initial note before they can be taken off of the whiteboard or before a disposition can be entered for them. This is a hard stop measure to make sure that no patients are discharged and no patients are admitted without the documentation being completed. Since I've logged in as a medicine test resident, we're going to start completing an initial note for the patient. Before I do that, I'm going to show you how to use the provider assignment function. Before you start seeing the patient, you're going to want to sign your name or sign yourself up with a patient. Since I'm a resident, I'm going to go into provider assignment. It auto-populates my name as the visit provider. Here you see my name populates under the visit or attending column. This is not used to mean the same thing as attending as we generally use it. It just means that you are the visit provider. If you are an attending, your name will populate into the attending field and you will no longer be asked for a preceptor. Since I'm a resident, this is asking me to identify my preceptor. I'm going to presume that I'm working with Raj Gulati and define that into the computer. As I click accept, you'll notice that these changes are reflected on the whiteboard. I've assigned myself as a test medicine resident to the computer and that my provider attending is Raj Gulati. As the board refreshes, you will notice that the initial field for provider has changed color, which means I have assigned myself to them. And you can also see that the attending has been assigned. Both of these fields are still yellow, however, because an initial note has not been completed. If a resident completes the initial note, this field will go blank. And when the attending signs that initial note, this field will go blank also. However, if an attending finishes the initial note, both fields will go blank. This doesn't mean that the resident cannot write a note. You may write as many initial notes as necessary. So the attending may write an initial note and then expect that the resident comes back and also completes an initial note. Whatever your general workflow is currently, that's the way it should remain. So for this patient, I've assigned myself to them. I'm going to go in, see the patient, and come back and then document an initial note. What we have done is made the initial note as brief as possible so that it doesn't require a lot of time. You should be able to do a note within 2 to 3 minutes. When you click initial note, it asks you when you're doing the note. It auto defaults to now. Then you'll see that there's only 10 fields that are required for each patient for the initial note. Many of these will be pre-filled in from the triage note. So for instance, the ED alerts has already been filled in. Again, the ED alerts, as I told you earlier, was a field where you can go and identify categories of patients that may have airborne precautions, droplet, or contact isolation. You can also identify things like one-to-one, restraints, ventilator, or SART patients. Additionally, this field will auto-populate for patients that have visited the emergency department within 24 hours, 72 hours, or 1 week, and also it'll pre-populate patients that have been admitted in the last 30 days. So I'm going to write my first initial note. I'm going to go to first field and it asks me what time I saw the patient. Since I'll generally be writing the note several minutes after I've seen the patient, you'll need to know a shortcut to enter that. You can say n minus 10 minutes. The computer already pre-populates that field by putting in n minus 10 minutes, which is 10 minutes ago. Then it asks you to identify the communication method used. You can pick from any of these selections: communication in English, the interpreter services used, and the number. Let's say I use Spanish, Pacific Interpreters number 3011. Now it asks you to identify the attending. Presumably at this point you've already discussed the care plan with one of your attendings, and whoever is on at that time you can identify. Keep in mind that if you identify the current attending and that attending is not involved in the care, they can push this note over to the next attending when they do sign out. For ED attending here, I'm going to sign myself. The provider auto-populates. Now you can go into the Review Systems menu, and this Review Systems menu is built to allow you to be as flexible as possible in terms of entering your review of systems. It's very much like the top of the chart, and you can click all the normals if you would like, and just click the pertinent positives. For instance, for this patient, we'll select shortness of breath, cough, and sputum, or at any time you can enter a comma and start entering free text. As you can see, the Review Systems column, as I've entered it, shows you that the pertinent positives have now been capitalized: shortness of breath, cough, and sputum. If I enter back into the field for modification, you'll notice that QuadraMed auto-selects all the text within that field for me. So make sure that when you're modifying this field, you don't just go straight here and start modifying it, because as you can see, it erased it. If you do this, you can press escape and back out, and it won't save the changes. I'm going to go back into Review Systems, and I'd like to add a few things here. One, you can see that if you click on Review Systems within normal limits, or any of these phrases, that it translates into a prose document or prose phrase. For instance, having clicked Review Systems within normal limits tab, it populates the field with Review of Systems negative except as below and in HPI. So I can click that, or I can click not applicable, or I can simply click through here as I would on the top of the chart. I'm going to click this: fever, shortness of breath, cough, and sputum. So you can see the changes that were made in that field. When I go to the provider note, a Word document will open, allowing me to document the entire note as I normally do. So I'm going to say 37-year-old female with 3 days of fever and cough. Now whatever you normally write as your note, you can write here. Additionally, you can add things like social history, or family history if you like. When you're done writing your note, you can close the window, and it asks you to save those changes within QuadraMed. Now it'll convert the Word document into a document that is usable in QuadraMed, and it puts it into the provider note section. Again, any of these fields can be modified later. As you see, if I want to click back in, it'll allow me to go back into the note and make any changes. You automatically take credit for having reviewed the nursing documentation, so please take a moment when you're seeing your patients to review the triage note. Next, you can go into the exam section. It's very much like the Review of Systems and like our current paper chart, where you can go ahead and click into certain fields to say that they're normal. Again, you can free text by putting a comma, putting in free text at any time. And you can see that the exam is displayed here below. I'm going to change this exam to everything normal except for the patient having coarse breath sounds, being tachypnic, and mild wheezing, and the rest of it I will say is normal. Finally, you can enter an assessment and plan. I've entered likely pneumonia, we'll check labs, cultures, chest x-ray, and give empiric antibiotics, possible admission to medicine. Also, there's a free text field for any comment that you'd like to add for this patient. Now that I'm done with the note, it should have only taken you 2 to 3 minutes to complete that note. You can save it. Many of you have asked whether we will be allowed to save partial or incomplete notes. Corporation standard does not allow us to save these partial notes. However, if you want, a workaround to that would be to just enter one thing in each one of these blanks and save the note. Keep in mind, that's not an optimal workflow, and that will require you to go back into the patient's chart and edit your note to make sure that it's complete. I'm going to accept this note as complete now. So when I look at the whiteboard, since I'm a test resident, and I've completed the initial note, when I hit refresh, you'll notice that the provider column has gone completely blank. That's because an initial note has been written. The attending column is still yellow because I've not co-signed that note.